1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in OWS fam. So glad you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab. It is Friday, just around 11 a.m. Eastern time as we are full throttle ahead, barreling towards week 8. So glad you're with us again. This show, as always, presented by 1 Week Season, where we build a lineup on DraftKings and use that as a way to talk through the upcoming slate. Again, in this case, week 8. I'm your host, Cheeseman. Make sure to check out the discount code, as you can see down below if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening on the pod right now. There is a 30% discount for Inner Circle at 1 Week Season. If you go to the go to the page, and if you're interested in that, go to the place where you would check out. You would use code OWS30, a great opportunity to just really have access to some of the really sharp tools that 1 Week Season has, and just the analysis, especially like things like the Slate podcast or JM to Win's weekly pod, where he kind of focuses on almost like a DFS coaching session. It's typically an hour to an hour and a half pod and really good stuff. A lot of stuff you get with Inner Circle. And so I just would definitely encourage you, if you're interested, been thinking about it, 30% discount this week for Inner Circle. All right, enough of that. It's time to bring up Papy. Papy, how's it going, man? How was week 7 briefly for you?
Man, what a week of injuries.
Yeah.
It was an okay week. I mean, not great. Ends up a little bit down on the week. Too much Juju in lineups and too much Watson. I think the lineup we built on this show last week had Juju and Watson, and I actually played it in just the Millionaire Maker, and I think it was very close to min cashing. It scored around 113 or something, but just didn't quite get there. But it had Juju and Watson on it, and it had Jerry Jeudy on it, who was also obviously influenced by the quarterback situation there. So the rest of the guys were pretty good, but it was a tough week. Just with injuries. I mean, I can't tell you how many lineups I had with guys just burning holes in them with injuries. It's what are you gonna do?
Yeah, those weeks are always tough because you still feel the same kind of like disappointment that you would if you just had a bad week and played bad plays or had bad process. But with injuries, it's not like you can really make yourself feel any better, even though it's 100% out of your control. Like with Deshaun Watson getting carted off, I remember seeing, I checking my lineups midway through the early afternoon window and noticing the big red out next to his name, and it's like Deshaun Watson was carted off, and obviously you feel bad for the guys in real life, but still, yeah, there's like literally nothing you can do when your lineups have zeros in them or whatever, a low score due to injury. But we move on, man. And we look ahead now to week 8. And I wanted to ask you before we take a look at ownership. There's just a lot of players that are mispriced this week due to injury situations. Jameis Winston, obviously one that comes to mind, or with Tua returning likely for the Dolphins. And so now you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Actually, both of those guys are questionable, but they're underpriced for their production that you would expect with Tua in that lineup. DeAndre Hopkins has recently been traded to the Chiefs. He's only 4,900. I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but what's your take on just the kind of that whole topic and how you might be kind of from a high level approaching it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of spots this week. It's a very interesting week with injuries and guys coming back from injuries and players just being obviously mispriced. I said I would hate to be the ownership guys this week because I think it's a very tough week to project ownership and exactly how that's gonna fall. There's some guys that are in the 3K range. I think Jalen McMillan on Tampa Bay is 3.7K on DraftKings. He's a guy is sort of like, all right, well, someone has to catch the ball on Tampa Bay. Palmer, I think, is in the 3K. I think he's even cheaper is another one. Maybe it's Otten, maybe it's him who ends up getting it. But somebody on Tampa Bay pass catcher is going to be really mispriced. The Dolphins' whole offense is mispriced. I mean, Tyreek Hill is the one who stands out the most, but Waddle is, too cheap. A-Chain is too cheap. I mean, the whole Dolphins' offense, you can say Smith, tight end is too cheap. They're all cheap because that offense fell apart without Tua. And if he comes back and can play similarly, I mean, it's almost pathetic how much they fell apart. I mean, remember the Dolphins' offense is like this premier offense in the league. Does everyone?
Yeah.
Remember that? It was like when Tua went down, it was just like, okay, well, they are the worst offense in football. It's quite the downgrade. And, I guess that's the reason you want to have a capable backup, is so you can at least be competitive if your starter goes down. But yeah, I think you have to play some of those guys, and they're gonna be chalk. I mean, I would think, but there's a lot of them. Like, there's a lot of options that all look good. So maybe that'll spread out ownership, but I mean, you're gonna have to play some of them.
Yeah, you absolutely will. So it just feels like the spots that the spots you could potentially differentiate your lineups this week are fewer than normal, because there's just going to be so many uh, you know, just plays across many lineups where it's going to just cause lineup construction to just be more similar than it would be if we didn't have this situation. But a stark contrast to what it was last week with how tight pricing was. Now you just have so many options and different ways you can go. But let's take a look at ownership here. And we got the ownership on Rotogrinders pulled up. So this is the overall ownership right now. And just tell me if you want me to jump to a position, but what stands out to you initially? And like you said, you would not wish to be the person trying to cobble together ownership this week.
No, I wouldn't. And I think Hall is probably correct as being the highest owned player. I think he's probably just very mispriced. I'm not even sure why he's so cheap. I mean, he should be much more similarly priced to Saquon Barkley than he.
I mean, maybe the matchup against New England, their run defense is pretty solid, so maybe just the dynamic pricing there. But nonetheless, yeah, he's low priced.
Yeah, he's cheaper than he should be. And then I'm guessing Tyreek Hill will actually be the second highest owned in my opinion. I think that that's a low-ish guess. It's tough to see him at 7K and not play him, especially in a matchup against Arizona that is a pretty desirable matchup overall. I've tried to convince myself of reasons not to play Hill because I think he's going to be very chalky. I think him and Hall will be similarly like the two clearest, chalkiest plays in my opinion. But there's not a lot of reason not to play him. And if he just scores one of his signature like 50-yard touchdowns where he makes it look easy on the very first drive, just like walks by the corner and it's like, oh, there's a 50-yard touchdown to Hill on the first drive, you're just going to be sitting there like, shaking your head like, why did I not? Like, what was I thinking? And then next week he'll be, 8.5K and you'll be like, why would I not play him at 7K? So it's tough for me in my mind to really get off of Hill. But I will have lineups obviously that don't play him, but I think he will probably be in a lot of my lineups this week.
Yeah, exactly. So let me just jump to quarterback real fast, and we can take a quick look at quarterback. Look at this, dude. Bo Nix is currently projected as the highest owned.
Yeah, that's interesting. He's Bo Nix. What could go wrong? But
got a matchup at home against Carolina, a pretty impressive team total. I think their team total is 26. So, but I would have expected Jameis Winston to be closer to the top. Anything that surprises you, though, when you look at this ownership? How surprising is Bo Nix or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I figured Bo Nix would be relatively high owned because he's cheap, he's in a good matchup, and he's produced with his legs. And those are the three things that typically, we look for in a fantasy quarterback. I think that there's not a super clear cut quarterback this week. I think Burrow has a lot of upside, especially for his ownership, and I think that Winston is the other one who is potentially too low owned based on these ownership projections. And I would guess Winston is not going to be 5% owned, although I do think he will be probably more like 10. I don't think he will be chalk, but it's hard for me to see him being 5% owned because he makes a lot of sense in a pass funnel matchup priced, like a backup basically. And I'm not really even sure why Winston didn't start or come in, last week when Watson went down. When we saw, Dorian Thompson come in and it was like, okay, this guy is he's not an NFL caliber passer. I mean, he just isn't. And then, Winston came in on the final drive or two and it was like, okay, here's a guy who, we know what he is. I mean, he's not, Mahomes out there, but he's aggressive and he can get the ball down the field and he's going to make bad plays and good plays. And I mean, we know what he is. I mean, he's an NFL caliber player. Like he's an NFL caliber passer.
He is.
So I'm really not sure why he wasn't the backup. And with how bad Watson's been, like he probably has been the best quarterback on the roster all year. Like in reality,
Let's face it. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. And yeah, and to your point with Jameis, he is who we thought he is, and he can play. He can absolutely ball. Will he make some bad decisions? Almost certainly, but that's part of what can also make him he'll take those shots downfield. He'll go for the deep ball, and if it works out, then you're pretty happy about it. So yeah, man. Any other ownership kind of angles you want to look at here before we jump into lineup building? You want to get into DraftKings here?
No, we can go into it. I don't think ownership. I think ownership's going to be very tricky this week. I wouldn't be shocked if ownership ends up being the projections end up being not very accurate this week. So
yeah,
you know,
I even just looking at that, there were some like Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. I mean, again, the value quarterbacks, I get the reasoning for them this week, but you got some real studs up at the top that were not receiving any ownership. So yeah, I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, dude.
All right, so if we go into the Millionaire Maker.
Yes, sir. Let's get into it. Where do you want to start here?
Well, let's go ahead and start with quarterback who we just talked about with Winston. And, don't have to say too much that we didn't just say, but just really cheap at home run pass funnel matchup. He's aggressive, which is the type of guy who scores fantasy points. Interceptions don't hurt you as much as they do in real life in fantasy. So I see him as a player. And again, I don't think he'll be 5% owned, but I don't think he'll really be above 10% owned. So I see him as pretty low to moderate ownership. So, let's give him a whirl. And since we know that he's not a runner, we're obviously going to stack him, and we're going to stack him with Judy. And the interesting thing about Judy was that they didn't use him like the whole game. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And I had the Browns pass catchers. Njoku was the main guy I had on most of my lineups last week, and then I had plenty of Tillman. It was really frustrating on lineups where I had Tillman and Njoku, and of course I had Watson on all those lineups. They just didn't use him. I mean, they really just. I mean, they threw to Moore, they threw to Njoku, they threw to Tillman. Judy it was like he wasn't on the field. He played a ton of snaps, but it was just like it was like a ghost out there. And so we saw Winston come in at the very end and target him like 3 times in the final drive. And so Judy ended with, I think, 5 targets, but 3 of them were from Winston on the final drive. So we're going to just say, hey, he's the type of QB who gets the ball to his top receiver. And he always sort of has been a QB who just, hey, where's my number 1 receiver? Like, all right, let's just fire the ball to him, 15 times. And when that number 1 wide receiver was Mike Evans, it actually worked for a while. So I think that he'll probably get the ball to Judy more, than we saw last time. So that's the logic here with this stack.
Love it.
And they're cheap, so we're gonna play them. And then we're going to look to go actually spend our money on a mini correlation in the Philadelphia-Cincinnati game, which I wrote up this week. And we're going to play Barkley.
Okay.
And T. Higgins.
Okay. T. Higgins going the kind of the mid-range receiving option there. And again, this is a game that just has I just have the same kind of feeling about this game that I did about the Baltimore Cincinnati game. These teams aren't in the same division, but 2 offenses that if they get rolling, I don't know if that's where you're going with this. These teams can put up points if they get rolling.
So I wrote this game up, and they're both teams that are fueled by the other team doing well. And the main problem with stacking the game up, although I'm sure I will have lineups where I really do force it, is that everyone is expensive who you'd want because they're 2 receivers on either team, or if you want to play Quan, you're talking about your whole salary basically there. You have to really struggle to fit those guys in. The interesting thing about Higgins, because I would have favored Chase, is I noticed he has a very interesting prop this week. And I will say when I look on other sites, sometimes 4 for 4 is a lineup generator I will look at. and they had Higgins as their top value this week at receiver. And I know that the way they tend to determine those values is they basically just look at props. And I've known that because I've looked at them over the years, and I've kind of just come to realize there's a very high correlation between who they rank the highest and props. And so that tipped me to go look at like Higgins prop. Why is Higgins the number one value? I wouldn't have thought that. And he has a very interesting prop in that it's almost as high as Jamar Chase's. And that's not their typical relationship. So I think they both have 5.5 catches juiced similarly to the over. I think one's minus 130, one's minus 145 at the chart I'm looking at right now. And then they both have, yardage props in the mid 70s. And so that's very interesting to me. I would call that sort of like a standout prop, or a prop that is not in line with expectations. And whenever I see that, those are the type of prop plays that influence my DFS play usually.
Yeah. Do you look for, like, is that part of your process, is looking at different player props, or is it just more like in this case, like something kind of made you think, hey, I should go check out Higgins prop?
No, I look at the player props every single week. That's part of my process. I try to look at them, early in the week, which is today usually, because some start to come out today or Friday. And then I'll look at them again, Saturday night, Sunday morning, and see the movement. But I'll say the thing is that anybody can do that. And you have to be careful with overusing that and just thinking like, oh, well, this guy's prop is this, so it means he's going to win the game. But where you do want to use it, the way that it's effective to use props is when you see something that is not in line with what you would expect. Because remember, props are just a reflections of the expectations. This is what the market thinks is going to happen. This is the expectation. And then, people bet and they move one way or the other and the expectations change. But whenever you see a player who has a prop like Higgins being almost equal to Chase, when their typical prop relationship is not that. Typically Chase has, 10, 20 more yards on his prop, an extra catch or two on his catch prop. So for them to be essentially equal this week, it's one of those things where if you look at it and you look at props all the time, you say that's not their normal relationship. There's like the books think Higgins is going to have a big game. Like they're basically saying that with this prop. Now, why? I don't necessarily know, but that's the type of situation where I would maybe be influenced and say like, I'll just go with their opinion and play Higgins here.
Yeah, man. Great stuff, dude. Awesome. So, and then pairing that with Saquon. So you got, 5 spots left. Where do you want to go next with this one? Or did you want to say anything about Saquon?
I mean, Saquon is just trying to get a player on the Eagles. I mean, the two players you really want there are Saquon or A.J. Brown. And there's more value at receiver this week than there is at running backs.
True.
And I think Saquon will be pretty low owned because he's expensive. And people are going to play a lot of the running backs in the 6K range. And so you'll probably end up getting him at relatively reasonable ownership, I would think. And he's just a guy who can score 40 points any given week. He could be the one who breaks the slate. So, all right. At the other running back position, we're going to go with A-Chain.
Yeah, 6,200, man. That is giddy up.
Yeah, I mean, this is a product of just saying that the Dolphins offense is mispriced. And, you certainly could want to put Tua in here. But I feel like whenever the Dolphins offense was in full swing, it kind of concentrated on Hill and A-Chain. And, they were the guys who could have huge days, and Tua didn't even necessarily always come with them. So I didn't feel like obligated to play Tua if I wanted to play the other Dolphins. But I mean, he's just not priced correctly. And right alongside that, go ahead and put in Tyreek Hill. So going to put them both in. If the Dolphins offense has a big day, those guys could both score 30 points. And again, they do it in ways where sometimes that doesn't always mean Tua scores 30, but you certainly could put him in there if you want. But that's what we're going to go with there and basically say, okay, Dolphins they're just mispriced.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those on the podcast, for those keeping track here, so far we got Jameis Winston at QB, Saquon Barkley and Devon Achane at the 2 running back spots, Jerry Jeudy, stacked with Jameis, and then T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill. So we got tight end, flex, and defense remaining here.
And for tight end, we're going to stay in that same game. We're going to go ahead and play Trey McBride.
Yeah, dude. Oh, okay, I think, I see where you're going with this lineup now. It's coming together.
So we're stacking that game. Even though we don't have either of the two QBs in it, we're still saying I think that's going to be a high-scoring game. I think McBride will be relatively lightly owned. There's, again, you value tight ends that you can play. And I just don't think a lot of people are going to really want to go to him. And you can get up to Kelsey too, who has a great matchup, so you can certainly go there. And all right, we're down to our flex. And this is going to be an interesting discussion here. For right now, go ahead and put McMillan in there from Tampa Bay.
Right, 3,700, and that leaves us 2,800 for defense. But yeah, what's your thoughts on it?
So here's what's interesting. These last two positions, defense now you'd have 2,800 and down. There's a bunch of defenses on that list at 2,800 and down that I feel like you can throw the dice on if you want. And leaving money on the table here isn't a huge deal. So the cheapest defense that I would feel comfortable with would be if you go all the way down to the Jaguars, who are 2,300. And that will leave you $500 on the table, I think. And yeah, they're at home against Green Bay. They've gotten pressure on the quarterback. It's not as if they're some great defense and you're super, excited, like, oh, I'm playing the Jaguars defense. I feel super great about it. But it's a cheap defense that probably won't be super highly owned. Again, at home, they've gotten some sacks. So, but if you look at the list of 2,800 and down, you might have a different preference of defense on there. I mean, I could make an argument for a lot of those different defenses and say, well, here's why they could be the defense who gets a defensive touchdown this week. But the reality is any of them could. You never really know. And then the one interesting thing that you could do here, because whatever defense you play, however much money that leaves you, you could add that money to a different position on this team if you wanted. So there's some flexibility. But if you put in the Titans, if you get incredibly frisky, if you go down there and you take the Titans, you can now turn McMillan into Bateman. And if you wanted to do this would be what I would say is like the most GPP type that you could go there with that combo at the end, because you're basically saying, okay, I'm totally punting defense. I'm just hoping for a defensive touchdown, or defense is fluky. And then I'm correlating, because Bateman will give you that correlation in the Cleveland-Baltimore game. And you're saying, like, I just hope that game and the Miami game and then the Cincy and Philly game, we're just in those games. It's one of those DFS lineups where you say, well, it looks pretty, and then you see the Titans defense in there, and you're like, that's why, because you're playing the Titans defense. But it's certainly a way that you could go. And if Zay Flowers, who is questionable right now, and I don't think Zay Flowers practiced yesterday either, so he may end up being a true game time decision or the wrong side of questionable. If he were to miss, I will probably give this lineup a throw in the Millionaire Maker, because I'll just say, you know what, like, Titans defense could get a strip sack for a fumble. It happens. I'll throw him in there and pray. And I'll say that I think the rest of the lineup is pretty good.
Yeah. Plenty of players who say their strategy is I'm punting defense and just, hoping on variance. And, I don't know the numbers or how often it's worked out, but it certainly has worked out. So punting defense is definitely a viable, if not risky strategy, but certainly viable. So great stuff, Papy. Anything else you want to add before we close this one out?
No, I mean, I'm excited about this week. Last week was kind of a blah week, had a lot of stuff right, but too many injuries to be profitable. But excited for this one. I think this will be a very fun week because there's so many different things you can do. There's a lot of games. There's a lot of players who are mispriced, and sort of how you use those players who are mispriced is going to determine how you do. So I think it'll be a fun week.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I can't wait. I just feel like there's going to be some crazy stuff that happens this week. I hope just people stay healthy. I hope we don't have another, long list of, players who get injured out for the season. But guys, good luck this week. Again, for those of you listening on the podcast, the lineup we ended up with was Jameis Winston, Saquon and Devon Achane, Jerry Jeudy, T. Higgins, Tyreek Hill, Trey McBride at the tight end, Rashad Bateman at the flex, and punting with defense with the Titans. And once again, guys, check out 1 Week Season. They're currently having a discount on their Inner Circle membership tier, 30% off. Use code OWS30 when you go to check out. Pappy, thanks for joining us, man, and good luck this weekend.
See you guys.